Hi there, my name is Nishin. I'm 17 years old and I'm from a little town called Fergus in the province of Ontario in Canada. My activism is really twofold. First of all, I look at issues of human rights, and second of all, I work with equity in education. So in the area of human rights, I've been working very closely with Amnesty International for the past 6 years of my life, leading two groups, one at a middle school and one at a high school. And I've put on many different events, some to raise money and others simply to raise awareness about different issues, including gender inequality and in particular, violence against Indigenous women in Canada. I've also put on events related to ethical consumer choices, such as fair trade products, and currently I'm working on issues of environmental sustainability as a human right and corporate accountability. In the field of equity in education, I work with the Upper Grand District School Board as a member of the Equity and Inclusive Education Committee. In this committee, we write policies to better protect minority students against discrimination within the education system. I'm also the leader of a group called the Gay Straight Alliance at my high school, and this group exists to counter and stigmatize homophobic attitudes which exist within the school and to promote friendly environments for people of all sexual orientations and gender identities. The reality is that we're youth, and although we are activists and we're now apparently high-profile activists going to the World Economic Forum, we are youth. And so I want to be realistic about my expectations for Davos, but I do want to be optimistic. Realistic but optimistic. And for me, all I'm looking for is one person with a decision-making capability to take one of the ideas of one of the six of us. Take that idea and push it at higher levels, to push it and fight for the voice of the youth. That's all I care about. If there's one individual who supports one of our ideas, that would be a huge success for me. I consider it a huge success for the whole British Council, for the whole Global Changemakers program, and for the entire international youth community. As many of you know, the theme this year for the World Economic Forum is Rethink, Redesign, and Rebuild. And to be honest, I couldn't have put it better myself, because this is exactly what needs to happen to the world right now. If you ask me personally how we can improve the state of the world, I would give you three answers. First of all, we need to really rethink what international development entails. Right now, we're judging countries as developed or undeveloped simply based on economic criteria and life expectancy. We're ignoring a whole other set of criteria. What about the subjective happiness of the people? What about ecological footprint per capita? All of this is being neglected in the current Human Development Index. So what we need to do is create a new scale. This new scale would measure development as the efficiency with which a nation derives well-being for its citizens per unit of resource consumption. This would take into account sustainability, and it would imply that the country which derives the most happiness for its citizens from the least amount of resource consumption would be considered the most developed. The second major issue we need to address is youth empowerment. I find it really ironic that a lot of the major issues facing society today, climate change, global poverty, the policies on these issues are being determined by politicians who will ultimately not be affected by the conditions of these issues. It is the youth who will be affected. We're going to have to deal with the wrath of climate change, and yet we have no say in the policies which are determining the outcomes of the climate. This needs to change. We need youth model parliaments in every single country all across the globe where youth can go and get their voices heard. We need to give youth more opportunities for international youth exchanges so that they can develop the empathy necessary to drive themselves to action. We need more opportunities like the British Council's Global Changemakers program to give youth the opportunity to have dialogue with the highest world leaders so that the youth voice can be heard on every facet of society. The third major issue we need to address is gender inequality. More often than not, women are the ones who have to carry the burden of their families, who have to provide financial support, who have to provide caring, and yet, isn't it sad that on a global level, women are the ones with the least access to education, with the least access to entrepreneurship training? This needs to change. If we want to address global poverty, if we want to address world hunger, we first need to address women's rights. We need to ensure that women have equal access to entrepreneurship training, have equal access to post-secondary education all across the globe. If I were to give one message to the world leaders in Davos, it would be, please look at sustainability. We've had to learn this the very hard way over the past 2 years. We had the economic crisis, which resulted from unsustainable loans. We had the Copenhagen summit. We have climate change, the whole issue, simply because we're not willing to look at sustainability. This needs to change. Our whole economies, our whole policy sets need to be redesigned to include sustainability. We're so obsessed with looking at profit and maximizing benefit right now that we fail to address the disasters which we're creating in 50 years. This needs to change. I really can't stress how important it is for young people to be heard at the World Economic Forum. Why? Because we have the idealism, and I know we're mocked for this often, that, oh, we're idealistic and young and we don't have a real sense of how things work in the world, but that's precisely why we need to be there. We're not tainted by the realism and stresses of the world yet. We have fresh perspectives, new ideas, new ways of looking at things. We need to be heard. Why? Because the world that they're creating in the World Economic Forum, the world as it will exist in 50 years, is the world of the youth of today. We need to hear what's going on, we need to contribute to what's going on, and we need to share with all the other youth of the world how we can make a difference. There are so many ways that world leaders can engage youth. Just a couple off the top of my head. World leaders need to sit down on a regular basis and listen to youth. That sounds really simplistic, but it actually, in fact, doesn't happen very often. World leaders need to schedule times and dates, maybe a few times a year, maybe once a month even, where they can sit down with youth and hear their voices so that they can better represent that half of the population in their parliaments. Furthermore, we need model youth parliaments all across the globe. We need parliaments where youth can go and have their voices heard on an equal level to everybody else, that the politicians can listen to and respect. It's really easy to be pessimistic about 2010, especially considering the Copenhagen summit, which has just finished, but I actually am quite optimistic about what can happen in 2010. First of all, if nothing else came out of the Copenhagen summit, at least there was media coverage. I mean, I've seen people around me who haven't been interested in environmental issues suddenly becoming concerned and who are willing to make their voice heard. I think we're going to see a whole new generation of activists come to life in 2010, and hopefully by the time the next summit comes around, there will be a substantial deal made. On other fronts, I think the state of the world is improving. Microloans are becoming so much more popular now, with organizations like Kiva making microloan donation accessible to the average person. I really think that we can work towards a sustainable solution to global poverty through microloans, and I think 2010 will boost that.